Okay, so it's time for everyone's fifth favorite replay yugioh YouTuber. I don't really like the word YugiTuber. Now that I think about it, I think there's only 4 other replay channels that I watch regularly. I know there's Hardleg, Lithium. There's this one Spanish channel that surprisingly has like the highest quality replay videos. I forget what he's called though, off the top of my head, but they're like super high quality, even though they're in Spanish. I don't know Spanish. And then there's also MBT Yugioh. He puts like a skit at the beginning of all of his replay videos. That's insane. There's some really high quality channels that, God, now that I think about it, my channel's bigger than all of them now. That's top 10s for you. Like, they do much better stuff than me. And top 10s are just, whatever. This video isn't about talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTubers. This is the Empty Jar deck. Empty Jar is a deck which tries to deck out your opponent by giving the Morphing Jar and then flipping it up and down over and over. And this deck right here tries to go into Gallant Granite, which was a Exceeds monster released in the Link era, so it was like pretty recently, which allows you to search out a rock monster from your deck. So it turns any 2 level 4 monsters into a search, which is great. It's finally a really good way to search out Morphing Jar. If you have Morphing Jar already, it has a different effect you can use to special summon it face down from your hand, which is also good. If it's special summoned from the graveyard too, this card would be perfect, but it doesn't do that. The only way to recover Morphing Jar is through very convoluted means. So the deck is just trying to flip Morphing Jar up and down over and over. It has lots of cards for flipping, as well as some other level 4 Exceeds monsters that can flip them up and down. And even Borrelguard Dragon, who can flip them up, which is surprisingly good, as well as the instant fusion target, Raijin. Really good. Let's get into the duels. Okay, first up, we have a Sky Striker deck. Oh, I remember. He resolved there can only be 1 on me, and I was able to do all of my plays almost as if it wasn't face up, because this deck uses so many one-offs. Because the deck is just full of level 4 monsters that can special summon themselves from the hand, but almost all of them have a hard once per turn on their effects. So there's no point in running multiple copies of them because of how this deck works. So I just run a whole bunch of one-offs, which turned out to work very well against there can be only 1, which was pretty funny. So starting hand, I can go straight into an Exceed summon for Granite to search out Morphing Jar. That's pretty much the play I do every time. I go into Gravity Controller, which allows me to get rid of an Exceeds monster for a Link monster that's pointing downwards. And then I go into IP Masquerena. That way I can go into a Unicorn during my opponent's turn if I need to disrupt plays. I just need to survive for a turn. That's all I'm trying to do. And that's what I do right here. He brings out my Raijin from the graveyard, and then tries to use it, and I return it back to my extra deck with a Unicorn during my opponent's turn. And now I have a Morphing Jar. Ooh, and I drew into a Book of Taiyou. This will let me flip up Morphing Jar. He resolves there can be only 1, which means I can only have 1 type of monster each on my side of the field. I can't have any multiple copies, and this doesn't hinder me at all. I have a Fiend type, a Warrior type, a Rock type, and I go through full combos for the rest of this duel. Which is just hilarious. There's so few decks that can actually do this. So part of the thing with Morphing Jar and flipping it up and down is just like, since I'm drawing 5 cards every time I pull it off, I'm able to put a whole bunch of resources into it. So I can run things like Magical Stone Excavation, which requires you to discard 2 cards in order to return a spell from your graveyard to your hand, which is worth it in this kind of deck. And then of course A&D Changers in the graveyard to flip them face up. Wind Up Zenmeister, which is the only card, rank 4 Exceeds monster, which can flip a card face down and isn't a hard once per turn. And then Borrelguard Dragon, so I can get rid of some of the Exceeds monsters for more spots to do stuff, and of course to flip Morphing Jar up. And then just more rank 4 plays. And right here, this is when I had to increase the the amount of cards in my deck. I was only running like 43, maybe 44 in this, no, 43. in this version of it, and I decked out. And if I just had 2 more cards, I would have been fine. And I think this is also when I added in Pot of Avarice. So in this next duel, my deck is now at 45. Oh, I was like, what? That's a 40 card deck. Yeah, it's at 45, I think. That's 5. No, it's at 44. But I also have Pot of Avarice, so I can make sure I don't deck out. I'm going against an Orcus player. Went against a lot of them. Lost a whole bunch of times. This is one of the times in which I did not lose. Because Orcus isn't as good as it used to be. They lost one of their good playmakers. So they set up their board. They get a Crescendo. So they have a negate, but they don't have a link monster, so they can't actually activate it. And they also don't have a way to special someone from the graveyard with Babel. So I go into IP Masquerena because I had a way to get Granite out. So they could search out Morphing Jar. And now all I need to do is really just survive a battle phase. So that's why I have these 2 cards out. Masquerena can allow me to go into Unicorn during my opponent's turn. I have a Book of the Moon to potentially disrupt plays, which he gets rid of, so it's useless now. And all I'm trying to do is just survive for a turn. If I can survive 1 turn, I can win, because I have Morphing Jar in my hand. So I go into Unicorn during my opponent's turn, so I can return their Borrelguard Dragon. He goes into Dingirsu with Babel's effect to get rid of my Unicorn. And then here we go, Morphing Jar, A&D Changer, flip it up, 5 cards, and there's the combo. Well, you know, once I get Morphing Jar off 1 time, the entire deck is built around spell or trap cards, no, spell cards, which can flip Morphing Jar up and down, and also level 4 monsters that can special summon themselves, so that I can bring out Exceeds monsters that can flip them up and down. Because all I'm trying to do is flip them up and down, right? That's the whole point of the deck. There's also Skyblaster Musketeer, which can flip them down. And then there's Zen Mighty, which can also flip them down. And there's also another card that I don't have in this version, because I was stupid and didn't remember it until later on. But there is also a level 4 Exceeds monster, I mean a rank 4 Exceeds monster, who can flip them up, which would have been very helpful if I had him in some of my earlier duels. But, yeah, it looks like he was able to, with all of the recursion. This is one of the bad things about Morphing Jar in the modern era, is all of this drawing sets up my opponent's graveyards too, and also lets them draw a whole bunch of hand traps. Morphing Jar's effect can be stopped by an Ash Blossom, or like an effect Vealer. So I kind of have to be careful when I'm flipping them up and down. If it's an effect Vealer, I can just chain a Book of Moon to it to stop it. But if it's like an Ash Blossom, there's nothing I can do about it other than just trying to play through it. This deck, the reason I'm running it in this version is so that I can play through multiple negates. If you can't play through 1 negate, then you're probably playing a very unviable gimmick deck. This deck was built around being able to play through negates. I do get Morphing Jar destroyed and negated a couple of times. I don't know if I actually have any of those duels though. I think in this one, yeah, I'm going against a Gren Maju deck, which is great for me. Gren Maju banished their own deck for me. I don't know if I'm actually able to pull off combos, so I go into Cloth Sheep, which allows me to, you know, Cloth Sheep with Instant Fusion is basically an instant Exceeds monster, as long as I have a level 4 in the grave. And I did all this without using my normal summon. Now that I think about it, I went to Cloth Sheep Granite, I still had my normal summon available. So I was able just to search out Morphing Jar, and then I also had cards to flip it up and down. This was a perfect opening for me. And then he destroys my Morphing Jar with his danger card. So, almost no mill happened. I do have lots of cards to just go into regular plays, so I go into an IP Masquerena so that I can maybe disrupt my opponent and then try again during my next turn. Because I do have ways to get Morphing Jar back. I have a Monster Reborn in my deck. And I have Cloth Sheep with Instant Fusion, which can bring them back. And I've already used that. So I'm kind of just relying on getting out, what should we call it, Monster Reborn, and then my opponent mills the hell out of his deck. So I was like, okay, new strategy, stall. 1 day of peace, that's basically game over right there. So he draws his last card, there's nothing he can do, he can't inflict damage to me this turn. And then he uses the danger card and then draws a card, loses. So, you know, this is winning because I was going against like the perfect deck for me. And then this last one is just against a Blue Eyes player. So, you know, not very hard. But he does have lots of effect dealers in his hand, which can potentially stop the combos of Morphing Jar going on and off. Doesn't in this duel though. So I go straight into Granite to search out Morphing Jar, but then he effect dealers it, so I have to waste one of my Book of Moons in order to let the effect resolve. And then that's it. I got nothing. I don't even have a way to protect myself. I just have one face down monster, and he's going to destroy it. So, you know, this is game over if he's able to put more than 8,000 points of damage on the board, which he's not because he's playing Blue Eyes. So, lucky me. And then I have one more turn to get off my combos, so, you know, Morphing Jar's in my hand, and then he effect dealers it, so I have to use Book of Moon to stop it, which is hilarious because Book of Moon is also what I was going to do to it anyway. Because if a card is flipped face down in a chain to an effect dealer, it no longer has a target for its effect to be negated. That's how that works. Cool thing about Invoked Raijin, I was playing Instant Fusion as a level 4 generator, and then when I was looking at the level 5s, I saw this card and I was like, man, this card's perfect for Morphing Jar decks. Yeah, this is the card right here. Photon Papilloperative. I wouldn't be able to say the name unless I looked it up online. You detach and exceeds material, and you can flip a monster face up. It loses attack, but that doesn't matter for Morphing Jar. I just need to flip it up, and it's a soft once per turn, which is perfect. So I just do that to flip up Morphing Jar. And then once I flip them up one time, it's basically game over. I go into a Borrelguard Dragon so that I can get a flip up, you know, whenever I want to use it. I also go into another Photon in order to flip them up anyway. Monster Reborn or Raijin to flip them down, but it's effect dealer. Not a big deal. I have so many cards to flip them up and down right now, this is game over. I flip them up with a Borrelguard Dragon, I flip everything down with Book of Eclipse. I need to do it one more time, drew into a Book of Taiyou, and game over. I had too many flips, there was no way I could really not win that. Okay, so let's go into the deck itself. Okay, so deck part, I'm just going to scroll through them real slow and quickly. That way, for future reference, I can see what cards are being used in this. And I'm going to make sure I don't talk for 20 minutes about the deck like I did in my video last week. So, Empty Jar. There's a couple of ways to run this deck. I didn't know which one I should do. Because, like, it can also be searched out through just Sangan, who is currently unlimited, and I was already basically adding it to my hand and waiting until my next turn anyway. So, since Sangan locks you out of using its effects for the turn, that wouldn't have really mattered. And you can just normal summon Sangan and then link it away with that one Salamangreat card, and then get a search while also a link monster on the field with a friendly arrow, which is basically what I was doing with Gravity Controller and Gallant Granite anyway. And plus, with Tour Guide at 2, that would have been a really easy way to search out Sangan. However, that would have still taken up a normal summon for either Sangan or Tour Guide, and there's also Spirit of the Fallwind, who can search out Morphing Jar as well, without locking you out of effects for the turn. And it's a level 4 monster. And I knew about Gallant Granite, and I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go with this version. I'm going to see if I can build a level 4 deck that can probably, you know, take advantage of Spirit of the Fallwind in order to search it out. And then I can just use Gallant's second effect to special summon it from the hand so I can start flipping it. That worked out good, although I wasn't really sure how to run the rest of the deck, because I had all the book cards to flip it up and down. So I started looking at all the Exceeds monsters, and then I remembered Skyblaster could flip it down, except its effect is a hard once per turn, so I can only flip it down one time. But Wind Up Zenmeister, this card is a soft once per turn on its ability to flip a card face down. So really, I could have just ran 2 copies of this and I would have been good to go. There's also one other Exceeds monster that's rank 4 that can flip a card face down. So I had 3 options for cards that can flip them face down, but since Zenmeister is a soft once per turn. I could just run 2 copies of this. And then I totally forgot this card existed, and there was a couple of duels I lost because I couldn't flip Morphing Jar face up. Because the only cards I have in the deck, the main deck that can flip them face up, are Book of Taiyou and A&D Changer. So I was basically reliant on having an A&D Changer in the graveyard, or drawing into a Book of Taiyou, or recovering it through a magical stone excavation. And there was a couple of duels where I just, didn't have either of those things. I didn't have a Foolish Burial to send one of these. There was one where my opponent used a Lancia to block A&D Changer's effect from the graveyard just completely, which completely, I lost that one, so you didn't see it. And if I remembered this card, I would have won so many more duels. I remembered so late into deck testing that this card existed. That's probably because I'm a big dum-dum. And then there's also Borrelguard Dragon. This is the only Link monster that can flip him face up. So I actually use this guy quite a bit because after a while I get a whole bunch of Xyz monsters on the board and they start taking up space, so I link them all the way with Borrelguard Dragon in order to, get more link zones and also one more flip on Morphing Jar, which was great. And then the cards themselves. So I'm running 1, 2, 3, 4. Only 4. No, I think that's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm only running 5 level 4 monsters who can special summon themselves from the hand that are hard once per turns. And then the soft once per turns, well, no once per turns at all. We also have Performage Hat Tricker, which is great. There's lots of cards that can special summon themselves from your hand, but a lot of them require you to have specific monsters on the field or a specific board state, like having no monsters, or your opponent controlling monsters and you controlling none, or your opponent having more monsters than you. So I only went with ones that were pretty easy to activate, like the 2 Crusadia level 4s. As long as I have an open link arrow, I can just special summon them to that, and it's a hard once per turn. So I'm only running 1 of those. This guy right here can just special summon himself from your hand, but at the cost of your opponent's special summoning monster from their graveyard, which doesn't matter because you're trying to win in a turn. And then Zephyros can bring himself out from the grave. And then this card right here, Nemesis Corridor. It allows you to target a banished card, return it to your deck, and then special summon this card. I'm banishing Performage Damage Juggler and A&D Changers all the time, so that was real easy to fulfill. And then the dangers themselves, there is another level 4 danger, because I need level 4 monsters for this deck. But I found the dangers were not very good while I was going through the combos or just setting up. They were kind of counterintuitive to this deck because a lot of the cards I play are quick play. So I can't set them in order to protect myself from, being randomly discarded from the dangers, because I'm trying to do everything in one turn. So I need to use my quick plays, and I can't set them because then they get restricted like trap cards. Oh, and there was also this card right here. That's like my 7th level 4 monster that can special summon itself from the hand. And the dangers, they kept ditching my really good spell cards, and I'd have to set them all, and then they would just end up ditching themselves, and then they'd get no effect. They didn't work super well, but it was still a non-once per turn special summon from the hand of a level 4 monster, which could draw you a card afterwards. It was so good, I kind of put it in anyway, and I instead just removed Chupacabra, which was the other level 4, and just added in 2 Jackalopes and a Nessie. That way I could bring out Mothman from the deck or search it out or something like that. Because I do have recovery. I have Pot of Avarice. This card right here was basically in here because it's draw power. It allows me to return cards to my deck, which I want, because I don't want to draw the game or lose before my opponent. Because there was one game in which I had the combo going perfectly, and I ran out of cards before my opponent because they were playing a 60-card deck. I forgot to save that one, though. That was pretty good. But I basically decked myself out. Pot of Avarice, I don't think I was playing it back then because I was still in the deck testing stages. And this card was really good, and I don't think I actually used it in any of the duels I showed. but it was really good for resetting my Exceeds monsters, because there's a lot of times where I was going through all kinds of combos and I just ran out of Exceeds monsters. So I was using Pot of Avarice to reset them. But also, you know, I need monsters in my Bane deck so I don't deck out, and that's probably why it never really showed up for those. And then the actual Link monsters themselves. IP Masquerena was basically my only... That was my game plan. The game plan for this deck was to search out Morphing Jar and then try to use it that turn. You know, barring the fact that I couldn't use it that turn, I'd have to go into plan 2, which was to survive for a turn so that I could then use Morphing Jar on my next turn. And IP Masquerena was basically my plan B. If I wasn't able to get out Morphing Jar my first turn, I would immediately shift my resources over to bringing out Masquerena with at least one other card in the field. That way I could go into Nightmare Unicorn during my opponent's turn. I don't know if there's any other Link 3 monster that's better to go into. I would really love to hear about something else that would have fit perfectly with this deck. 'Cause there's lots of good level 4 monsters to go into as well. I mean, Link 4 monsters. I could even go into Borrelguard Dragon. He's not half bad. Can't be destroyed by card effects. Never mind. That's really bad with Masquerena's effect. I don't know. I probably could just put in a Borrelguard Dragon, but that didn't matter. I never had the resources for a Link 4 monster during my opponent's turn. But very often I'd be able to go into a Link 3, and Unicorn seemed to do the job. I kind of wish there was someone better, though, than Unicorn. But that was good enough. I think it appeared in pretty much every single duel I showed, or at least 3 of them. That combo saved my ass so many times, just allowed me to survive for 1 turn in order to not lose, you know, against actual good decks. If it's something not so good, tier 2, like this deck right here, this is not a tier 1 deck, I could probably survive a turn with almost no protection or just a face-down defense position monster. Against real decks, I needed some kind of disruption, and even then, that probably wasn't enough against some of the really good ones. And then Gravity Controller is in here just so I can get rid of one of my Exceeds monsters to get an arrow on the field, because I need to bring out other Exceeds monsters. Instant Fusion was so good. Mud Dragon was for level 4 plays, and Invoked Raijin was for flipping. He could also be recovered to flip more since his effect is a soft once per turn. So good, especially if I bring him out with Cloth Sheep. Cloth Sheep was great. It's only in here because I play Instant Fusion. If I bring out my Fusion monster into a zone this card points to, I can special summon a level 4 lower monster from my graveyard, which is so good for this deck. It's one of the few ways I can get Morphing Jar back if it gets destroyed, other than Monster Reborn. Anyways, there's also another way to play this deck where you give Morphing Jar to your opponent and you flip it up and down. Because there's a lot more cards that can flip your opponent's cards up and down than your own. This version went for flipping my own cards, because if you give it to your opponent, they can't use Effect Veiler on it, and that's about it, so there's no real benefit to it. They can still use Ash Blossom on their own card if you give it to them. So since this deck did such a good job of just flipping my own card face up and down, I just didn't bother with putting in anything to give it to my opponent. So that's why I went with this version. It worked out well. I'm sure there's ways to improve it, but this is the final version I have from all the deck testing. There are a couple of other cards that can special summon themselves from the hand that are level 4 that I just removed because they weren't needed. Fortune Fairy Sween, Raid Raptor, Singing Lanius. You can special summon this card if you have an Exceeds monster. This card can special summon itself if you just draw it. And this card can just special summon itself if you have no cards. Block Dragon was something I was probably going to experiment with if this version failed, which it didn't. That would have been a good way to search out Morphing Jar as well, and have more staying power. That probably would have worked better, but I don't know, because this version worked out pretty well for me. Okay, that's it. Hopefully I didn't talk for 20 minutes this time. It's a fun deck. I like gimmicky stuff, and I'm going to try to do one of these every week, unless I can't, in which case I won't. So, until next time.